it's not just about what's transpiring on ground. We also have to look at the larger picture as far as the world goes, and that's to do with the NATO summit. It's inching closer. We've seen NATO leaders that are all going to gather next week, aiming to overcome divisions, in fact, on Ukraine's push for a path to membership. US President Joe Biden, the Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, and Ukrainian President will be among the 31 NATO leaders that will be attending this summit in the Baltic state. Now, Zelensky is expected to press for Ukraine to be admitted into the NATO soon after war was triggered by Russia's invasion comes to an end. NATO is expected to present a package of support to Ukraine at the summit, including an upgraded cooperation body, the NATO-Ukraine Council, and a bundle of non-lethal military aid that is likely to help Kyiv's armed forces to reform and reach NATO standards. It is a push that Zelensky has been making for several months now. That, of course, is in its last leg, given that the summit itself happens next week.
We are working with our partners. We are working on security guarantees. We are also working on helping our partners to make some conclusions for this upcoming NATO summit meeting. And we would like to have all the decisions to be made during the summit. In this case, it's obvious that I'll be there and I'll be doing whatever I can in order to, so to speak, expedite that solution, to have an agreement with our partners.
For 500 days, Moscow has brought death and destruction to the heart of Europe, seeking to destroy Ukraine and divide NATO. Our summit will send a clear message. NATO stands united, and Russia's aggression will not pay. And then the most urgent task, and all analysts agree on that, is that we will stand by Ukraine. We will provide support to Ukraine for as long as it takes, because unless Ukraine wins this war, there's no membership issue to be discussed at all.
Sanjay continues to be with us. And Sanjay, there are a lot of impediments as far as Ukraine's membership to the NATO grouping is concerned, all of which is going to be in focus when the summit happens next week.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is quite clear. From the NATO countries, it is all the support that they could offer and more than certainly they intended, but short of membership. And the membership is the tricky issue, because once Ukraine becomes a member, an attack on Ukraine is an attack on all NATO countries. So the US, Germany, France, Britain would be directly involved in the battle with Russia. Clearly, NATO wants to stop short of that, because everyone knows what that could lead to. There's a very real danger that that would spill over into a nuclear confrontation. People are stopping short of that, and the announcement by the US of a new aid package, military aid package to Ukraine is really symbolic of the message. $800 billion worth of arms and munitions, including cluster munitions, promised to Ukraine just on the eve of the Vilnius summit. The US is really handing out the message it will do absolutely all it can, but at the moment not push for membership of Ukraine in NATO formally and finally.
Right, all of that is expected next week. Whether that decision actually happens, whether there is some sort of fillip to the Ukrainian side, we'll have to wait and watch. For the moment though, Sanjay, thank you so much for getting us the latest on that. Now, ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania, US President Joe Biden has expressed his support to make Sweden join the NATO. He says that should be done as soon as possible. And that decision, or that move, was taken in a phone call with the Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, in which the two leaders discussed Sweden's bid to become a member of the Western Alliance.
U.S. President Joe Biden told Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan that he'd like to welcome Sweden into NATO as soon as possible. That's according to the White House, which said the two leaders discussed a range of issues over the phone on Sunday ahead of an upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. Membership to the alliance requires unanimous approval by all NATO members, and Hungary and Turkey have yet to clear the way for Sweden. Turkey accuses Sweden of harboring members of militant groups, mainly supporters of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, who Erdogan says organize demonstrations and finance terrorist groups. Swedish officials say their nation is no safe haven for terrorism.
That person can be prosecuted.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg signaled he would convene a meeting between Erdogan and the Swedish Prime Minister in Vilnius on Monday before the summit officially starts. Biden will hold talks with NATO leaders on Tuesday and Wednesday. During the summit, allies aim to show support for Ukraine and give Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a sense of what will have to be done to gain NATO membership sometime in the future. In a CNN interview previewing his trip, Biden urged caution for now on Ukraine's drive to join NATO, saying the alliance could get drawn into the war with Russia due to NATO's Mutual Defense Pact. According to Zelensky, an invitation would send a message that the Western Defense Alliance is not afraid of Moscow.
Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden arrived in London at London's Winfield House on Sunday as part of the three-nation tour that will be mainly dominated by the NATO summit. Now, this trip comes against the backdrop of Washington's recent decision to supply Ukraine with cluster bombs.
US President Joe Biden touched down in London on Sunday night ahead of this week's NATO summit in Lithuania. Biden is set to hold separate meetings Monday with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and King Charles, with discussions focused on Ukraine and climate change respectively. This is Biden's first visit to Downing Street as president and his fifth meeting with Sunak in as many months. The trip comes against the backdrop of Washington's recent decision to supply Ukraine with cluster bombs. The UK is one of 120 countries which has signed a convention banning their use due to their threat to civilian populations. Sunak and Biden are expected to share notes before the NATO summit, which starts on Tuesday and will be dominated by the war in Ukraine, as well as the country's bid to become a member of the Defense Alliance. In a CNN interview aired Sunday, Biden appeared to throw cold water on the prospect of Ukraine joining anytime soon, saying, quote, "I don't think there is unanimity in NATO about whether or not to bring Ukraine into the NATO family now, at this moment, in the middle of a war." After Downing Street, Biden plans to hold talks with King Charles at Windsor Castle, where discussions are expected to centre around the climate crisis.